This fall, we have hosted 3 months of peace with the theme of building peace through social justice. This conference is co-sponsored by Johnson County Community College and the Center for Global Peace Journalism at Park University. My name's Louis Duguid. I was a longtime journalist with the Kansas City Star, and now I'm an author, lecturer, freelance writer, and political action committee chair for the National Association for Multicultural Education. Today, I'm your moderator. Here's a bit of housekeeping. We are recording this session, so if you have concerns about that, please take the appropriate steps, such as turning off your video. Oops. Getting my fingers to work. For our program, if you have any questions for our presenter, please put them in the chat box at the bottom of your screen. I will share your questions with him. The presenter will try to leave time at the end of the program to provide answers. Our 2020 Greater Kansas City Peacebuilding Conference began in September, examining the mainstream media's influence on peacebuilding and social justice. In October, the conference focused on colonial history in such places as Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India, with efforts of Mahatma Gandhi and others toward winning freedom and peace, followed by today's societal and diplomatic outreach promoting social justice and peace. On November 4, 2 presentations addressed peace and efforts to care for the underserved people in this community, as well as the larger Poor People's Campaign, a comprehensive and effective approach to Black Lives Matter and addressing the needs of all marginalized communities. If you missed the earlier programs, I encourage you to Google the 2020 Greater Kansas City Peacebuilding Conference to view recordings of those sessions, which have been posted and they will be posted in the Peacebuilding Conference website. I will post in the chat box. This morning, we begin with the Reverend Dr. Vernon P. Howard. Reverend Howard is president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference of Greater Kansas City, a position he has held since 2015. Reverend Howard led the successful $15 per hour living wage ballot initiative in Kansas City in 2017. Reverend Howard also guided the One City Economic Development Sales Tax campaign to victory in 2017, which will channel about $100 million over 10 years into housing, neighborhood refurbishment, commercial development, jobs, and small business opportunities into the most distressed zip codes in Kansas City. Reverend Howard led a statewide civil disobedience demonstration that launched the movement for Medicaid expansion in Missouri. Reverend Howard currently is the senior pastor of St. Mark's Church in Kansas City. You will find more about the speaker and his educational background on the Greater Kansas City Peacebuilding Conference website. Please welcome Reverend Dr. Howard, who will speak today on the pathology of American racism, new millennium causes, symptoms, and cures. Dr. Howard.
Thank you very much, Mr. Duguid, and it is a pleasure and an honor to be here to participate with this very important conference and with all of our community of shared learners and scholars. It is a great privilege to be engaged in an academic setting which converges what we study, what we read, what we research, what we document, with what we do and what we practice day to day in the field. And so this is a wonderful space to be in, and I want to thank you for that. We greet you in the name of Jesus Christ, our Lord, and are thankful to be coming to you, having shared work with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference of Greater Kansas City and the historic St. Mark Church, and are grateful for this opportunity to be here on today. Who knew? Who knew? Very sly move. Dr. Patterson. Very sly move, Professor Youngblood. Very sly move, Miss Jasperson. I'm almost certain that if you all had something to do with this move, certainly Mr. Duguid did. Or perhaps it is serendipitous, never coincidental. No doubt it is providential that during the climaxing moments of the JCCC and Park University's Greater Kansas City Peace Building Conference, that the United States of America would be enthralled amid a prolonged national election process, culminating a fierce and fervent national debate, at the center of which has been the intertwining and inseparable principles of democracy and racial justice. Yes, these dates in November, the 4th and the 5th, are on the heels of what was to be an election day in which we would know who would be the leader of this nation and presumably the free world by today. But this election, which now is more than 48 hours deciding, and which technically began weeks ago when the first ballots were mailed and cast in states across the country, is really not only about the current moment of despair and crises many of us in this country are facing right now. It is equally as much about the core identity of this nation and the question which still begs to be answered now, so many decades after and who we shall become. Without question, an airborne virus projected to infect soon upwards to 10 million Americans, and which has killed and concern. But yet there's another big fish in the pond. There's another infection gone viral, infecting in different ways those who are born carriers and those who are infected via exposure to the diseased who are born carriers. The infection, the disease gone viral, is American racism. Now, I know what you may be thinking. Here we go again. He's another race card player. Well, I simply play the hand America dealt me. It was American global colonialism and the capitalism of the constitutional America, which led and supported the African slave trade of 12 to 20 million persons of African descent, of Black skin and hue, to the so-called New World, representing the largest forced migration of God's children in human history. British, American, and French intellectual and philosophical partnerships that produced and legitimized the word race as a classification of human distinction, leading the way to race as a social construct, aligning European and American colonial enlightenment period, one that dubiously touted itself as highly awakened, and yet it affirmed that period did, and those scholars did, and those religious leaders did, and those thinkers did, the gross scientific errors of the 18th century, which codified dark skin as an inferior race, and the creamy, pinky skin of Europeans as the superior race. It was American slavery, which used then these codes to morally justify its sick dehumanization of Africans as property to be sold for economic gain legally for some 250 years. It was America's founders who placed within the founding documents the legal classification of the Black or African race as only 3/5 human, and thereby denying full rights of citizenship, such as voting, such as land owning, such as trading, such as education, such as wealth building, such as family development, such as cultural enrichment, such as equal protections under the law and defense from violence and harm. Excuse us if we play the card we've been dealt. It was America, which after over 650,000 lives were lost in the Civil War, to then in its own time decide who America was, continued into the late 19th century and 20th centuries to block voting rights, to deny equal access to housing, to discriminate and exclude from access to jobs, to concretize unequal education, to lynch, to rape, to assassinate Black life and Black leaders, often without recompense, which has caused current African Americans to lag in just about every category of social and economic wellness in this country, all grounded in a lie about so-called, quote, race, end quote. So then, those who stand in the intellectual, social, political, and religious tradition of such historical thoughts and acts and horrible deeds in this country, and those in the 21st century who embrace such actions and deeds, who sympathize with such actions and deeds, who reinforce such actions and deeds, and dare I say, who vote for those who support and reinforce such actions and deeds, are in fact racist. A nation that reinforces systems and structures today which build upon those historical inequities and tragedies of Black people, holding in place the subjugation and the marginalization that has taken place for over 400 years. Those who comply, those who participate, who are of that construct of Black race and white race, and those who are in the category of whiteness, who hold and support that in place, yes, are a part of the system of racism. Excuse us if we happen to mention that. We play the cards we have been dealt. Excuse John Lewis, if you must, for saying it's all right to get in good trouble. And to announce again all over in the 21st century what we forgot about the 20th century, that protest really is a part of the fabric of American society. Excuse John Lewis for that if you must. Excuse Colin Kaepernick for engaging in that same spirit of civil disobedience and peaceful protest to highlight the need for Black life to matter as much as everybody else's life matters. Excuse him if he kneels peacefully, but we will not excuse the NFL for still barring him and whiteballing him from playing as a quarterback in its storied league. Excuse the protesters, many of them right here in Kansas City, who hit the streets after the George Floyd murder, but who should have been in the streets already in 2013 and 14 when unarmed Black man Ryan Stokes was shot in the back by KCPD officers. If there is an excuse, there is a pardon us for not being out and raising hell before 2020. The raising of hell. This is the moment in which we must understand in American society that there will never be peace without justice, so long as there is such overt, such brutal violence against Black lives. There will always be hell for somebody to pay. Or shall we say, there will never be peace, in which we understand peace to be nothing broken, nothing missing, and nothing lacking. But America may be on to something. 2020 brought a certain and newfound discontent with the disease, I like to term it, called racism. For the first time in history, the pain and peril of the Black man and the Black woman took center stage in the moral conscience of America, if only for a little while. Rather than hanging from the trees, seen as strange fruit in the poplar bluffs of Arkansas, we now were front and center and in the mix of being the highlighted and accentuated concern of the moral conscience and the psyche of American society. What a turnaround. A president named Trump, who in response to Colin Kaepernick's kneeling, actually identified NFL players who peacefully kneeled as sons of bitches, now months later had to back up and be quiet as the NFL turned and repented and now is advocating for justice for those same Black men that it would not allow to kneel a year ago. Maybe America is on to something. right here in Kansas City, even several weeks ago, as a band of young, vanguard, vibrant activists and protests assembled at 12th and Locust, downtown Kansas City, Missouri, intending to stay there to occupy the property until there is justice. And they were white and black. They were young and old. They were conservative and liberal, progressive and on either parts of the wings. But here's what we understand: that they came together across boundaries that historically had separated and divided Americans, and a new generation emerged within this country and in this city that knew not the racism in their own fiber that their ancestors knew, and decreed and declared, this is not a disease that we will be overtaken by. America began its ascent and is now in what some like to term as a moral reckoning regarding its past and current crimes against the Black race. This election then highlights America's decision not just to pick a president whose policies and politics will help find a cure for COVID-19. Oh no, this election accentuates the defining moment as to the question of our discovery of the cure of the national pandemic of the disease of racism, which has plagued us since our inception. This disease, when looked at from the standpoint of a psychologist, might evaluate its cognitive processes. This disease of racism, when looked at from the mindset of a jurist, might examine the legal codes, the laws which have in fact contributed to such racial despair and brutality. This disease, from the standpoint of an economist, might even look at baselines of pay and work and economic strategies that need to be employed in order to break the bonds and the chains of economic violence against Blacks and working poor in America. But then there is the theologian. There is the one that looks inside of the soul. There is the one that permeates through the fiber of society to try to determine and discern root causes of our systemic and our structural maladies and diseases. From the standpoint of the theologian, I ascribe to African American prophetic Christian thought and practice. In the tradition of a Frederick Douglass, in the tradition of an Harriet Tubman, in the tradition of an Ida B. Wells, in the tradition of a Sojourner Truth, in the tradition of a Martin King, in the tradition of a Malcolm X, in a tradition of, yes, a John Lewis, and yes, in the tradition, they all came from that liberating tradition in the Judeo-Christian heritage of the one from Nazareth, his name was Jesus, who said, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he hath anointed me to preach the good news to the poor, to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captive and the recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty, to set at liberty, to set at liberty them that are bruised. Prophetic Christian thought in the African-American tradition, streaming from the Judeo-Christian heritage, posits the church as a liberating institution in the world and posits Jesus Christ as the oppressed liberator of everybody in humanity who shares the cross of social, economic, and political brutalization. African-American prophetic Christian thought then posits an analysis of the soul condition of a people that would categorize and codify Black people and white people and create them superior and inferior as a social construct. The African-American Christian prophetic thought analyzes, critiques, breaks that down, and says to white power and white privilege that power is the cross that you must bear. Power, part of the anatomy of racism, power, which is in a case, privilege lusted after. Lord have mercy. Privilege desired and held on to. Power and its illicit offspring of greed is the honeycomb, Lord have mercy, of American racism. Sharing power demands releasing power. A spiritual and social feat, which largely and generally speaking, this nation and European nations who were involved in the pathology that we had described historically have found collectively impossible to achieve. Sharing power demands the acknowledgement of the humanity of my neighbor. The failed feat of shared power, the inability to release control, indicates a spiritual void that is in the individual, and in this case, in the collective psyche that has produced this notion of superior whiteness and privilege. The anatomy then of racism, of power, of privilege, of the inability to release control, is a spiritual and social dis-ease, which speaks to and indicates a spiritual void of insufficiency, valuing my over against our, I over against we. And ultimately, hear this, the barbaric and the beastly over against the civil and the humane. This election is not just about a man of economic policy to, in fact, increase the coffers of the rich, and one, on the other hand, to increase and stabilize the coffers of the middle class and the poor. No, we must think deeper than that. This is about whether we shall be a beastly nation, a barbaric nation to our neighbors, or whether we shall have the mercy and compassion to acknowledge that justice is for everybody. Our humanity becomes compromised when those in power and those who have privilege fail to acknowledge and recognize the humanity of neighbor. Oh, that glorious distinction which cast upon us the blessing and curse of stewardship over the creation. We must be able to acknowledge the distinction between the barbaric and the humanity. And when we do not, then our civilization is in danger of ruin. And then there is the cognitive piece of the anatomy of racism, which has to do with a learned distrust of the other, particularly the dark-skinned you. I'm reminded of that movie, The Help, emerged on the scene 2011, 2012, 2013, that chronicled the plight of Black female domestic workers in Mississippi and detailed the horrible, sometimes private and sometimes public crimes that white racism and white privilege in the South inflicted upon my people. I watched that movie and saw the woman who played the Black domestic worker. She scooped up into her lap the 3-year-old white child and poured into that white child the humanity that the white child could not even get from her own mother. And it was the Black domestic worker who said to the 3-year-old white child, "I am kind, I am smart, I am important." What a message. I am kind, I am smart, I am important. The teaching that another human being is not to be naturally distrusted because of the color of their skin, of their hue, is a teaching that corrects this kind of sickness within the psyche of the American populace. And here it does, it disturbs and disrupts the absurdity of white privilege and white power as illegitimate in the minds of our white brothers and sisters. What are we saying? Simply this, that in these modern times, in the first 2 decades of this 21st century, that we have choices to make. And the choices are clear. A, will we go back to being a predominantly white nation that cares and concerns and creates policy and drafts laws which benefit only one race? Or will we be that shining example of a multicultural, multiracial, in fact, the only legitimate, internationally created and made nation in the world that presents justice for all people, no matter what race, color, or creed? That's a great vision. We have a choice to make. On the one hand, as I draw to my close, one might be disturbed that there is a presidential candidate who in fact despises, who in fact rejects, who in fact would even summons domestic attitudes of terror to attack and kidnap and kill sitting governors who embrace that vision of a multiracial, multicultural, internationally created nation of justice for all. And yet there is one in the White House who would send dog whistles and who would commission persons to bring harm and hate to others who see that new vision of America. We're in some troubled times today, but there is hope. Oh, yes, there is hope. Hallelujah. There's a buoyancy that's moving in American society. There is hope. There are people of faith who are praying and mobilizing and organizing, saying that Black lives matter and all lives matter. And until we get there, we will keep on marching, protesting, preaching, and teaching and praying. My dear friends, there is hope. There is a Park University program and a Johnson County Community College partnership that is peace building through social justice and understands that until we get to that space where everybody in America can say nothing missing, nothing broken, and nothing lacking, there is hope. For me, in my faith tradition, groomed by the prophetic tremors of men and women who were willing to pay the ultimate price and die for the right to be free and the right to have their humanity respected, I stopped by to tell you there is hope. And that hope in my tradition is in Jesus Christ, that great spiritual, that great social model teaches us the respect and the regard for our fellow brothers and sisters. There is hope that the disease of racism can be cured, and the reaffirmation of the humanity and dignity of all American citizens in this country. God bless you.
Incredible speech, Reverend. Thank you very much. And now we'll go right toward questions if you're of a mind to entertain them. Fantastic. First one that surfaces is whether a vote for Trump is actually a vote for racist and racist acts, and how do people separate the vote from the candidate? And then as a piggyback question, isn't voting based on ignorance and isolation different from the malice of implicit racism?
So what we have tried to do in the movement with respect to SCLC and the social action of St. Mark Church and others in our community is we have attempted to apply prophetic Christian thought in the public square. And what that does is shifts us from personal attack or even preference of personality choice, and shifts us to policy analysis. And when we do that, we are able then to compare the policies and statements that come and make determinations based upon that. One of the classic examples, I think, of the issue of race with President Donald Trump has to do with two images that we have seen in advertising, which try to play upon the ignorance and bring misinformation and lies with regards to Mr. Trump's impact of his policies on Black Americans. When Mr. Obama took office in 2008, we know that the American economy was on the brink of depression. Some believe certainly was a deep state of recession. And the unemployment rate for Black people was over 16% in 2008 when Mr. Obama took office. By the time Mr. Obama's term was over in 2016, the unemployment rate for Black people had gone back down to around 8%. That was from 8 years of particular policy. By the time we got 2 years into Mr. Trump's leadership, he began to tout that he had done more for Black people in terms of economic and jobs than any president since Abraham Lincoln. Okay, what basically happened is that the improving economy continued over the course of those 2 years. And of course, we know what happened recently with COVID and so forth. This is just misinformation and ignorance. Furthermore, to that point, as we've been discussing Mr. Trump's claim that he had done so much for historical Black colleges and universities, and had photo ops with leaders, Black institutions, and so forth. And turns out that Mr. Trump did not sponsor, nor create, nor have the idea of any kind of investment or support for HBCUs. But in fact, the vision and the legislation came from the Congressional Black Caucus. When it's time for the president to sign the bill, which the president must do as a part of the process, that photo op becomes somehow this image of how one has done something for a particular constituency. Wrong, lie, just not the case. In these instances, we see how there is not a genuine attempt to bring justice and equity, but yet an attempt to exploit through imagery and exploit through propaganda so that one might win loyalty when there's no just cause for doing so. These kinds of decisions and actions, both of those decisions and actions that I just mentioned, are racist because they dehumanize Black people. How do they do that? It does not matter whether your policies help us or not, but you will use photo ops and you will use the political process to pretend as if they do. That is exploitation. That is dehumanization.
Okay. Next question. Someone here puts in the box asking if you could explain the Black Lives Matter movement and how people who don't understand can really grasp why it's necessary to raise up one group versus all of the people who have been overlooked and underserved.
My sense is that the Black Lives Movement is a mantra, if you will, a clarion cry, a clarion call. It is very real on that level. There's another level to which the Black Lives Matter movement is actually institutional and organizational in some places. There is actually structure and institution and roles that individuals play within the context of that organized entity. How be very clandestine, often very difficult to access, very difficult to learn about, and that's by design. The third way I think you can understand the kind of the spectrum of the Black Lives Movement is then through movement in terms of what it is for change. And so I think those are the three ways, and the manifestation of Black Lives Matter in any given city, in any given region across the country could manifest itself in one, two, or all three of those kinds of ways. And so it can be very difficult to wrap one's mind around this kind of very powerful, but yet oftentimes kind of stealth and unapproachable and oftentimes some untouchable kind of movement here. Having said that, I'll go back to my words earlier. We cannot blame the Black Lives Movement, Black Lives Matter movement from simply playing the card that we have been dealt. I mean, who can deny that Black people should say Black Lives Matter? Nobody criticizes other segments of our community, our nation. Women matter, children matter, Latinx community matters, LGBTQ community matters. I mean, and it's okay for them to say that. But what is the problem of Black people saying Black Lives Matter? It speaks to the kind of disgust and despisement that's a part of that pathology that we talked about, that both distrusts and demeans and wants to keep you in your place. And so we must have an acceptance and embracing of that clarion call, of that institution and of that organization, and of it as a movement. Having said that, let me say this, that the prophetic Christian tradition, particularly the African-American prophetic Christian tradition, is able to walk and chew gum at the same time. We understand that the affirmation of Black life is important and should be important, and there should be a moral reckoning around it. But Black Lives Matter, in its ultimate purpose, is my prayer that it moves this nation to understand that you cannot despise or dehumanize Black life or any other life. The value of the Black Lives Matter movement is that it can become actually the light and city on a hill, which is the example to America of what we can and what we should be. And it's my hope and prayer that we do not fall into that pattern as a Black Lives Matter movement. But get this, not only that, but as a women's movement, look out. And as the movement to protect the rights of immigrants, and as the movement to protect LGBTQI, all of that, all of our movements must take us into a window in which we can see that a movement has the ability to be the moral conscience of a nation that impacts all issues, such as healthcare as a right and not a privilege, such as, might I say this, because we're coming after it, automatic voter registration based on your citizenship in the United States of America, such as ensuring that there is equal education and that there is no peace until it is manifested in this country. If Black Lives Matter movement does not deal with the core justice issues of humanity, then it has failed in its ultimate purpose, in my opinion.
Great answer.
And that's not just true for the Black Lives Movement. That's true for the women's movement. Oh, come on, somebody. That's true for the LGBTQI movement. That's true for all movements in America. None of us can be what we are supposed to be until neighbor is what he and she is supposed to be.
Absolutely. The next question, I'm going to combine two of them. The one question is, how can white people be better allies in this? And then the other piece of this question is, what are your thoughts about so many people who are white joining the protest post George Floyd's killing by police? Is it a fad? Is it sustainable? As Dr. King would say, where do we go from here?
One must understand, again, the pathology of racism. We are intentional about that term, utilizing it, because it speaks to the particular dynamics of the manifestation of a disease. And that this disease, as I attempted to highlight, probably in a very poor fashion, is both spiritually and socially based. And there are particular manifestations or the ways in which that disease manifests itself. How white people can become an ally is to first and foremost acknowledge that I'm born with a disease. I'm born with it. How am I born with it? Because I am actually manifest now in the world into privileges based upon my skin color. I'm born into that. I'm a part of that privilege, that acknowledgement of that. What the privilege does is it shapes psyche. And it begins to shape and form how I relate then to neighbor, particularly neighbor that is not white. And there are not white people who are untouched by that. Hear this, just as there are not Black people who are untouched by racism. I am not of the belief that a Black person can be a racist, because the anatomy of racism has to do with power and privilege and the codes and categories and the social constructs that have been applied. And so if we look at the notion of race and Black being inferior and white being superior and so forth, and all of the constructs that go along with that, within the construct of racism, no, I can't be a racist, not within that construct that has been created by America. I didn't create the construct. I didn't do that, others did, but I live within it. And I don't believe I can be racist. I don't hold that power. I'm viewed as inferior, not superior. However, I can be biased. I can discriminate. I can treat somebody unfairly because of a difference, but I am not a racist. And I think that we must come to terms with that. If we don't acknowledge the reality of the sickness, we can never deal with the cure.
And so how can people who are white become allies in this whole social construct in taking it apart and creating opportunities?
There's a lot of conversation and phraseology around becoming anti-racist and deconstructing racism and so forth and so on. When I look back at the history of African American freedom and the struggle in this country, I look to see where there have never been movements and moments of Black upheaval and Black progress without partnership from whites. That's the reality that we live in. That is the plight of a race of people or a minority of people in a larger, broader body politic. And so it is a necessary partnership and relationship to have. I think there are two things with respect to becoming good allies. Number one, listening, being able to sit with those who are oppressed, to hear their stories, to feel their pain, and to understand the legitimacy of their grievances. It starts right there. You have to be willing to understand and accept the legitimacy of the grievance. You have to also, I believe, be willing to be led. Oh Lord, I'm gonna say that again, to be willing to be led. There are many allies and partners who will in fact invite you to be a part of the movement so long as they are leading. But in fact, if a white ally is serious about this, then there must be a willingness to be led. And I think that's important. The third thing I think is significant is to read some of the right stuff. And what I mean by that is that I think it's very significant that we engage ourselves in academic settings, in theology, in sociology, in politics, and so forth, in political science, that speak to a kind of perspective that helps us with those kind of partnerships and helps us with understanding the legitimacy of those grievances.
I'm glad you mentioned reading, because one of the questions is, what books would you recommend for people to really extend their knowledge about what they as individuals might be able to do, or to understand how we got to this point in this country?
Sure. There's a book here called Stamped from the Beginning. Ibram X. Kendi, Stamped from the Beginning. The Definitive History of Racist Ideas in America. Ibram X. Kendi. This is a great book by Isabel Wilkerson, Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents. Isabel Wilkerson, Caste, The Origins of Our Discontent. A Legend and Legacy, Henry Louis Gates Jr., The African American, Many Rivers to Cross. Henry Louis Gates Jr. Those are some great ones. Obviously, Michelle Alexander's New Jim Crow, very significant, I think, for people to read and to know and to understand. Eddie Glaude has got an outstanding book out, Begin Again. Some of you might have been exposed to that. Eddie Glaude, to focus on James Baldwin's America and its urgent lessons for our own, which is an outstanding book as well.
Fantastic. I've been reading a book that's titled "The Color of Compromise: The Truth About the American Church and its Complicity in Racism." And you talked about the church, and you talked about Jesus Christ. And I guess my question is, how do you bring people in the church who have been soaked in this oil of white supremacy into the truth and the light that Christ is about, the emancipation of all races?
I think theological centers of education are very important in shaping minds, hearts, and spirits. I think the church has followed after the categories of political analysis that have been framed by this country, conservative versus liberal, left wing, right wing, moderate, progressive, all of these kinds of terms that categorize and define our practices and our thoughts within the political economy. And we have to begin, I think, as a church to shift our language. Jesus said, thy kingdom come, thy will be done, which speaks to a different kind of order. And I think that the analysis and the way that we view and look at our practices within the public square are so flat and linear, left wing, right wing, and then you got the conservative, moderate in the middle, and all of that. I think we have to begin to look at who we are and what we do as deeper than that, and as having more dimensions. And as I was reflecting on this myself, I was having a difficult time with coming up with a new concept because we've been so ingrained in that flat kind of linear analysis. I will say that it does go back somehow to how we, and I hate to be a broken record, honor one another's humanity. And whether liberal or progressive or moderate or conservative, left wing, right wing, if the church does not speak truth to power, whether it is liberal or progressive, whether it's conservative, Republican, or Democrat, if the church does not speak truth to power and defend and protect the humanity of all people, then it has become a tool and instrument of power, as opposed to being a God-ordained influence for that which is moral in the world. And so unfortunately, the church has followed after those constructs and has been an instrument and tool rather than being a voice for change. And I think that a reckoning for the world, at least for America, will not come, I'm going to say this, will not come without also a reckoning of the church.
Great answer.
That's coming. That's coming. That's coming.
So are there particular steps that you would advocate to bridge the racial divide?
Yeah, I'll tell you, I really am not one who has ever been real disturbed by white people worshiping in one church and Black people in another church and Latinx people in other churches and so forth and so on, because religious expressions are also informed by cultural preferences in terms of liturgy and music and language and all of those things. And so, I mean, for me, the bigger question is, how do we, when we leave those spaces of worship, we should connect together in them, but there's no, I mean, to me, great sin because we might worship in separate places as a practice. The bigger question for me is, how do we align ourselves as faith communities in the public square to ensure that the people who are in the pews, no matter what their race, color, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, so forth, have their humanity defended? Now, I happen to stand in the tradition of SCLC, which is a faith-based civil rights organization, which has Christ and Christian in the framework of its banner and so forth, and which has welcomed all faith communities in terms of both Protestant, non-Protestant, and other religious traditions to break down barriers that have separated us, not just within the worship setting, but also within the context of our working community and our challenging of government to be just and fair. God said to the prophet Amos, tell them, I despise your festivals. God spoke to the prophet Amos and said, tell the people, I don't want to hear the sound of your music. God told the prophet Amos, tell the people the sacrifices that you are burning on the altar, and they're coming up to my nostrils. They smell, they stink in my nostrils. I don't want it. Here's what I want you to do. Let justice roll down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. That's the worship I'm looking for, God says. That's the sacrifice I'm looking for, God says. And I think for the people of faith, we miss that the greatest act of worship is our mobilizing and organizing together for the justice for all of God's people.
Okay. I'm going to pose one last question. I'm glad you mentioned the SCLC because I want to get you to talk about that after this last question. The last question, particularly with an audience of many students, is what can young people do? What can students do to solve this problem of racism?
I am just so impressed and have a great enjoyment of the academic setting. I just think that the academic setting is just a very exciting and vibrant setting to be a part of, and to know that it has always been student and student-aged individuals who have been on the vanguard of change in this country. We've heard it before. Dr. King was in his early mid-20s when he emerged on the scene in Montgomery and took leadership there, local church, and then of course was tapped on the shoulder to be a part of a team to lead a movement, Boyce Boycott against the city of Montgomery and its transportation system. These kinds of exciting, emerging young leaders is something that the movement is dependent upon. And I would say to those who are in classrooms and in academic settings, that this is your moment. I mean, this is your moment to make change. This is your moment to exercise all the discontent. There's nothing more significant to a movement than divine discontent. And that is grounded in a willingness to take action that has principle, action that has a principle. Recently, SCLC and our partners at Urban League and NAACP and others led a civil disobedience action at the Police Board of Commissioners meeting downtown at 12th and Locust. And we had strategized around what we were going to do to ensure to change the focus of the conversation of the KCPD. And we were intentional. We believe without a shadow of a doubt that we were in the right, that we were standing on moral high ground by demanding that there be a policy shift with respect to KCPD, which includes the dismissal of the chief of police. And we decided that on that day, that there would be no discussion other than a discussion of why has not Cameron Lamb, Donnie Sanders, Ryan Stokes, and others here in Kansas City who have been shot and killed, unarmed Black men have been shot and killed without justice coming for them. And we decided that we would engage in civil disobedience, non-violent direct action to shut that Board of Commissioners meeting down, not to harm anyone, not to disrespect anyone, not to issue personal attack on anyone, but simply to demand justice. And it was Dr. King that said that we have a moral obligation to disobey an immoral law. I'm going to say that again. Again, we have a moral obligation to disobey an immoral law and do it in the methods that speak not only to our goals and aims, but speaks to who we are as a people. And I really do believe that our actions and our methods speak to our end game just as much as our strategies do. And so I'm proud to be a part of a tradition that will stand tall for justice, but will also do it in such a way that keeps the moral high ground. And I'm proud of that in terms of our organization and our history.
Last but certainly not least, can you just give us a little bit about the SCLC and how people can get involved with the SCLC here in the greater Kansas City area?
Sure, absolutely. SCLC here in Greater Kansas City began organizing and mobilizing around a celebration of the life of Dr. King in 1969. That was the year after Dr. King was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. And at that time, the national SCLC had been formed in 1957. By 1969, there was activity here and so forth in commemorating Dr. King and commemorating the movement. By 1972, here in Kansas City, now U.S. Congressman Emanuel Cleaver and late Reverend Kenny Ray, along with a host of other leaders who were inspired and led and guided by Joseph Lowry to start a chapter here, did so in 1972. One of SCLC's first actions of protest and civil disobedience was to occupy the Country Club Plaza during those times with the Poor People's Campaign right here in Kansas City. The organization has continued to grow and prosper over the years. Some of you may remember the great name of Reverend Nelson Fuzzy Thompson and others, Reverend Sam Mann, Bishop James Tyndall, and others who have given leadership to the organization over the years. Over the last 5 to 6 years, we have made attempt to reinvigorate our activism and our protest wing of the organization. And as a result of that, we've engaged in many initiatives that we believe have been used by God to uplift people who are underserved and people who are marginalized in Kansas City. And I think those are listed in the bio and so forth in terms of what we've done. We have a couple of people here who are part of SCLC. The Reverend Shania Chandler is here, who's on our team and on our staff. The Reverend Lloyd Fields is here, who's the board of directors, and others who have been a part of that work. And we're proud of it. You can go to sclcgkc.org is the website to connect with us, sclcgkc.org, and can also be found on Facebook, SCLCGKC.
Well, I want to thank Reverend Dr. Howard. The next session of this peace building conference begins at 12:30. There's another link that you'll have to connect to in order to get onto that Zoom call. But Reverend Dr. Tom Howard, you've given us a whole lot of information and a lot to think about, and I certainly appreciate your input. It's been wonderful.
Louis, thank you. It's always a pleasure working with you as well, sir. You're a great professional and a great fighter in our freedom struggle. I do personally appreciate you very much, Louis, and all of your work. And thank you to all of the organizers and planners. Ms. Jasperson, Professor Youngblood, thank you. Thank you. Where's Dr. P? Where is he at? There he is. Dr. Patterson, thank you. God bless you all. And thank you for all the listeners for your respect and your engagement.
Been great. Thank you.